Border battle. New developments in the president's push to secure the boundary between the U.S. and Mexico. Breaking an oath? A House committee considers whether to remove the phrase, "So help me God," from its swearing in of witnesses. We're on Capitol Hill with the latest. Political protest. A second round of demonstrations in Venezuela, what the White House is saying. And a younger audience. Pope Francis reminisces about the highlights of his trip to World Youth Day. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, January 30th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Lawmakers in Washington are scrambling to strike a deal to avoid another government shutdown. Today is the first meeting between negotiators on both sides of the aisle since President Trump agreed to reopen the government last week. The president warns meetings are a waste of time unless they discuss funding for a border wall. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president firing a warning shot to lawmakers. If their solutions don't include money for the wall, he's threatened another government shutdown or a national emergency declaration. Still, lawmakers disagree over the best way to secure the border.
The components of border security are people, technology, and a barrier. And everybody has voted for all three. We've all voted for all three.
We need to address problems with solutions rooted in facts, not merely rooted in campaign rhetoric. We need solutions that honor America and honor our American values and who we are as a nation. We all support border security. Everybody.
Lawmakers face a February 15th deadline to finalize a new spending bill. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer believes it's best if the president stays out of the negotiations on Capitol Hill, saying when the president mixes in, it's a formula for failure. Now, that didn't keep the president from sharing his view today on Twitter, writing, "If the committee of Republicans and Democrats now meeting on border security is not discussing or contemplating a wall or physical barrier, they are wasting their time." The acting defense secretary says the U.S. will be sending several thousand American troops to the southern border to give more support to Homeland Security. The Pentagon estimates more than 4,000 will be deployed there over the next couple months. Lauren?
Mark, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops called for an end to the government shutdown. What are we hearing from them now?
Well, Lauren, I spoke to an official with the USCCB today. The bishops are welcoming these talks from lawmakers, their discussions, hoping for consensus to avoid another shutdown. Now, when it comes to border security, the bishops have long called for comprehensive immigration reform. That includes security, but also protection for vulnerable immigrants. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. We'll have analysis and of a possible agreement for the president and what the plan could look like coming up later in the show. A rising political star who marshaled the power of black female voters will deliver the Democrats' response to the State of the Union next week. Stacey Abrams narrowly lost Georgia's governor's race. The decision elevates her profile amid her calls to run for the Senate. A group of Democrats also asks women of both parties to wear white to the speech. The color was used during the suffragette movement, which gave voting rights to women. "So help me God" is a phrase you hear recited in oaths of office, but today a House committee considered doing away with it. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with more. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. You know the words, "Do you solemnly swear?" and then it goes on and ends with, "So help you God." But a proposal by the Natural Resources Committee would have cut that last line. It failed by a large margin, but it did spark lively debate.
Is the question to put in "So help you God" or to take it out?
Committee Chairman Raul Grijalva of Arizona says it was a mistake to propose cutting "So help me God," and members of both parties back his position.
I do think that we could use a little bit more of God, not less. All of us. I get concerned about the thought that we're not making an oath to something that's higher, something that's bigger, something that is above us.
I think it's hurtful and harmful to go out of our way to take it out. I don't see the point of that. But Jefferson was clear. He believed in God. He believed that there was a faith. but he didn't believe that you should be forced to believe in it, even if you were an atheist.
Unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And so anyway, it is part of our beginning, and some of us believe it could lead to our end if we neglect the source of our blessings.
But Democrat Jared Huffman thinks the phrase violates the separation of church and state.
All of these trappings of religion and God in these oaths certainly have not kept an awful lot of people from lying under oath.
After debate, the full committee approved keeping the phrase.
All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. All those opposed?
So it'll be heard here on Capitol Hill for the near future.
So help you God.
I do.
But here's a new question. Can a committee chairman just skip the line? Just yesterday, the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee administered the oath to witnesses and didn't use "So help you God." Now, the presidential oath of office found in the Constitution doesn't include the phrase either, but it is added. Lauren?
So why did that House committee propose cutting the phrase, "So help me God"?
Well, here's the original draft of the new rules for this session of Congress, and all of the changes are in red and included, or all of the deletions from last year's rules are in red, and sure enough, the phrase "So help you God" is here, indicated to be cut from the rules this year. Now, of course, the committee allowed it to stay in there. The Natural Resources Chairman called this draft, this cutting of "So help you God," a mistake. He said it was not sinister or anti-spiritual.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. The author of a book on the Catholic teaching regarding homosexuality and chastity is accused of a sexual relationship with a minor. Daniel Mattson, shown on our broadcast last year, is the author of Why I Don't Call Myself Gay, How I Reclaimed My Sexual Reality and Found Peace. He is accused of taking part in an online relationship that led to sexual interaction via a webcam around 15 years ago. No physical contact is alleged to have taken place. Mattson did not respond to a request for comment. For more on this story, including the reaction of a church leader who works with Mattson, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Thousands of Venezuelans take to the streets again today. They say their embattled president, Nicolas Maduro, has got to go. President Trump is voicing his support for the mass protests and the opposition leader, Juan Guaido. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. The president spoke with Guaido on the phone today, telling him the U.S. supports Venezuela's fight for democracy. The White House and the State Department recognize Guaido as the country's interim president, but Maduro is not backing down. Venezuelans leaving their homes and offices across the capital city, Caracas, to demand socialist leader Nicolas Maduro give up his power. They chant phrases like "free elections." The demonstration comes 1 week after opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself president before thousands of supporters. He says he's the nation's rightful leader because Maduro's re-election was a sham. The 35-year-old Catholic saying the Maduro regime has stolen billions from the Venezuelan people to protect their own assets. Maduro making it a point to be seen today on TV with his biggest supporters, the military.
Esa es la forma infantil de dirigir una política exterior desde la Casa Blanca.
The socialist president appears to make fun of National Security Advisor John Bolton, who was photographed carrying notes which suggest that 5,000 troops could be deployed to Venezuela's neighbor, Colombia. The Pentagon says that is not an official statement. But these Venezuelans who defected from the army say they would welcome U.S. troops. He says as soldiers, they're asking the U.S. to help with communication equipment and weapons to bolster democracy.
Si los Estados Unidos pretende intervenirnos,
Maduro is asking the American people in a video not to allow Venezuela to become another Vietnam. He says he's willing to meet with his opposition, but many are skeptical he will ever consider stepping down. The United States, Canada, and more than a dozen Latin American countries have recognized Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela. But Russia and China still support Maduro. Today's protest won't be the last. Another demonstration is scheduled for Saturday. Lauren?
And I see that Guaido is also talking about walkouts and encouraging people to do that. Wyatt, Pope Francis has still not taken a side in this conflict, and it's controversial about whether or not he should. But the bishops in Venezuela do support Guaido. Why do you believe the Pope has held back on joining the bishops?
Well, Lauren, some Vatican analysts believe Pope Francis is trying to protect all of the Catholic groups which are operating in the country, many of whom help the poor, the sick, and the people who have lost everything in the country's economic collapse. Now, many of these aid groups are worried they would be forced out or kicked out of the country if the Pope openly calls out the Maduro regime. Lauren.
I know. He also said he was worried about a bloodbath. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. A grenade thrown into a mosque in the Philippines kills 2 Islamic teachers and injures 4 others. Police are trying to determine the motive and identify the suspect. They do not think it was in retaliation for the bomb that killed 21 people at a Catholic Sunday Mass. A Protestant church in the Netherlands has ended its 24/7 nonstop prayer service, which began in October. The church was protecting a family seeking asylum from being deported. Dutch law prohibits authorities from entering a church during services. The government has now changed its immigration policy, meaning the family of 5 from Armenia may be able to stay in the Netherlands. A comforting visit today. The Holy Father met with the family of an Italian priest who had been missing in Syria for more than 5 years. Father Paolo Daolio was kidnapped in Raqqa, Syria in 2013, and today the Pope received his mother, sisters, and brother at the Vatican. Father headed a monastery near Damascus where he had been working for the last 30 years. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome bureau chief, and he is in rainy Rome. Alan, is there any news about Father Paolo's whereabouts?
We don't have any news, Lauren. He disappeared 5.5 years ago, just basically counted past the 2000th day that his family came and visited the Pope today. We don't have any news from Father Paolo, unfortunately, and that basically is the situation as it exists.
Alan, you interviewed Father Paolo in 2012, and that was right before he was kidnapped. Tell me a little bit about why he was in Syria, what he was trying to accomplish, and why he was kidnapped.
Well, Lauren, he had a great passion for Syrian people, for the Syrian culture, for the Arabic language. He was a Jesuit priest, he is a Jesuit priest, and he had gone to study in Beirut, Lebanon, and became interested in Syria. He ended up crossing over the border, finding the ruins of a monastery that he refounded. It's called the Deir Mar Musa, and he founded it to increase the understanding between the different religions that were present, in particular Islam and Christianity, there near Damascus, there in Syria. He, in the end, was kidnapped as he had crossed over after being sent out into exile by Assad. He was crossing back over into Syria illegally, so to speak, to help the people there. And the last time he was seen, he was on his way to speak with an ISIS official in the city of Raqqa about the release of some hostages and also the future of Christians in Syria.
And that's when he became a hostage, so we think. Pope Francis often condemns the civil war in Syria, and so do much of the West, the U.S., and they denounce President Bashar al-Assad's regime. What's the Vatican's presence there?
Well, Lauren, the Vatican has a cardinal nuncio that is present there in Damascus. His name is Cardinal Mario Zenari. He's the only nuncio in the world, which is the top diplomatic representative of the Pope to any nation, that's a cardinal. And the Pope made him a cardinal to show his concrete solidarity and attention to the conflict there in Syria. The Vatican also works with a lot of different organizations, humanitarian organizations, particularly those associated with the Catholic Church. And they're all working on the ground to improve the situation, which has been so hard for all of the people there, and in particular also for Christians.
Thank you so much for the update, Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome bureau chief. Get out of the rain.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up next in the broadcast, analysis on what a deal on immigration between the president and Democrats might look like. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she has confidence in the bipartisan committee working to secure a border deal. Responding to a question about President Trump calling the meetings a waste of time unless they include a discussion of the border wall, Pelosi says the committee can reach a good result without interference from anybody else. Joining me now is Rachel Bovard, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute. Rachel, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thanks for having me.
Could Democrats and Republicans on this conference committee, who are desperate to avoid another shutdown, defy President Trump by forging their own agreement?
Well, look, Democrats in Congress have said they're willing to negotiate, but they would only negotiate once the government was open. Well, now the government is open, so I think the question is, will they negotiate with President Trump? Coming to a deal separate from what President Trump wants, I think President Trump would view that as not a negotiation.
Right, but the question is, could they defy President Trump? I mean, could they forge their own agreement? Is there a likelihood of that?
I don't know there's enough Republicans in Congress right now that are willing to buck the president on this. He's been very clear on this issue. This is what he wants for the last 2 years. I think there's enough Republicans in the House and Senate right now that still want to come to an agreement that represents some of what President Trump wants. Maybe not all, but at least some. And I think they're going to have to get to that or they're going to face another shutdown.
Polls show that most Americans do not want a border wall. They don't think that is worth a government shutdown. Why hasn't President Trump been able to move the needle on this?
Well, I think he's come around on the issue. He went from concrete to steel, which is a little bit different. He said, okay, maybe if in some places we have a barrier, in other places we have a border wall system, right? Maybe we have more border security. Maybe we have more border patrol, more judges. All of these things are things he's given to Democrats. But he said part and parcel among that has to be, in some places, a barrier. And Democrats have been unwilling to come to the table on that. But you've seen President Trump come to the middle a little bit. And I think he's waiting for Democrats to come a little bit his way.
The president could still declare a national emergency at the border to build the wall. Does that weaken, though, however, Congress moving forward?
I think he will only take that step, he's made that clear, if Congress fails to do its job. So if Congress cannot come to an agreement, he said that's an option he is still considering. I don't think it's his first choice, but he wants the wall. And he said, hey, Congress, I'm going to give you 3 weeks. Try to come to an agreement. Let's see what you can do.
Rachel Bovard, Conservative Partnership Institute, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
First, murals of Christopher Columbus are covered up at the University of Notre Dame. Now, the head of the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend is issuing a call to action for students. Bishop Kevin Rhodes asks male students at the university to join the Knights of Columbus. In an open letter, he wrote, "We are called by Christ to put our faith into action by works of mercy and charity. The Knights in our diocese are exemplary in responding to this call." The university recently covered up those murals of Christopher Columbus because of how they depicted Native Americans. The Knights of Columbus are named for the explorer. Up next, Pope Francis recaps his trip to World Youth Day. And a pro-life Democrat reacts to New York's abortion legislation. The Catholic governor of New York is shrugging off calls for his excommunication, some of which have come from bishops. Andrew Cuomo defends his support for the state's law signed last week, which allows abortion until the 9th month of pregnancy, saying, quote, "I don't govern as a Catholic." Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Bishop of New York, rejected calls for Cuomo's excommunication, but says the abortion law is ghoulish and the governor insults and distorts the church teaching. And Democrat Virginia Governor Ralph Northam is facing fierce backlash. This morning, he defended a new abortion bill introduced by Democrats. The bill would legalize abortion up until birth. Joining me now is Kristen Day, Executive Director of Democrats for Life of America. Kristen, welcome back to our broadcast.
Thank you for having me on.
I want to read what the governor said this morning on a radio interview. "It's done in cases where there may be severe deformities, there may be a fetus that's not viable. If a mother's in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered, the infant would be kept comfortable, the infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and family desired, and then a discussion would ensue between physicians and the mother." Your thoughts?
My thoughts are that he's greatly misinformed about what this bill would do.
Is this infanticide?
It is infanticide. And I think he is also confusing current law with what this new proposal will do. You know, I mean,
it allows third trimester abortions in cases which a woman's life or health is at grave risk and has to be certified by 3 physicians.
Right, and under the new law, there would only be 1 physician, which you know, an unscrupulous abortion provider could sign off on any any reason.
I want to play this clip of Delegate Tran, who's responding to questions from Virginia House Majority Leader, Republican Delegate Todd Gilbert, about how far along in a pregnancy an abortion could be considered. Let's listen.
Where it's obvious that a woman is about to give birth, she has physical signs of that she is about to give a birth, would that still be a point at which she could request an abortion if she was so certified? She's dilating.
Mr. Chairman, that would be a decision that the doctor, the physician, and the woman would make.
I understand that. I'm asking
point.
if your bill allows that.
My bill would allow that, yes.
It's just heart-wrenching to hear her describe that and her say that her bill would allow that. Part of me has compassion for her because I really do think that she's being used by the abortion industry and selling a bag of goods that's just not true. And you could see how she was struggling there to answer that and not wanting to answer that. And I hope that she realizes exactly what her proposal will do, and it's going to be very detrimental for women.
Before we get off of this topic, I just want to say that the spokesperson for Northam recently came out and said no woman seeks a third trimester abortion except in the case of tragic or difficult circumstances such as a non-viable pregnancy or in the event of severe fetal abnormalities, and that the governor's comments were limited to the actions physicians would take in that event. Let's move on to New York. Are you concerned that abortion bills like this one, like the one in New York, which allows abortion up until the day, right, that day before birth or of birth, are going to drown out the message of pro-life Democrats? You work for Democrats for Life of America, Kristen Day.
You know, I think this abortion extremism is going to help the pro-life movement because I'm hearing from more people who say that they can't vote for Democrats if they continue to push this abortion extremist measures like they did in New York and trying to do in Virginia and New Jersey and other states. So this abortion extremism is actually pushing Democrats out of the party and raising our voice as pro-life Democrats to say this is wrong. I think there's a March for Life in Virginia in April, so there is going to be a large contingent of pro-life Democrats.
I have a feeling you're going to be seeing a lot of people at that march,
yes,
right?
And there'll be a lot of pro-life Democrats there saying that enough. We do not want to become New York. We want to be a state that protects women, supports women, and provides support for women to carry their pregnancies to term. That's what we stand for as Democrats, and all Democrats can rally behind that.
Kristen Day, Democrats for Life of America Executive Director, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally, tonight, Pope Francis reflects on his recently completed trip to Panama for World Youth Day, saying one of the highlights was the pride and love parents showed in their children.
Con le braccia I bambini. Così. Quando passava il papamobile, tutti col bambini.
I've seen that happen where people hold up their children and sometimes he kisses them. The Holy Father says parents lifted their children when the Pope Mobile passed, and he called young people, quote, the today and now of the church and the world, saying they brought a lot of joy to Central America at a time when the region needs hope, peace, and justice. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn, EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.